right, time for your case study assignment, or activity, not assignment. And we're going to, as I mentioned, the end of the previous presentation, we are going to take a look at an organization called Ewaso Lions, which is in Kenya. The shaded part of the map is the region in Kenya where they do most of their work. This is in a region called Samburu, which again many of you have heard me talk about if you had me in the nonprofit class, which many of you did. So let me kind of introduce you to the organization and the context, and then we'll have you do a little bit of sleuthing online about Ewaso, and then come up looking back at this list. Which of these skills, so on the right side, or behaviors, do you think might be most important for Ewaso Lions to undertake in their efforts to protect and conserve the African lion, the Panthera leo, the scientific name? So I'm just going to do it'll mostly be photos here. So the region where Ewaso Lions is doing most of their field work in northern Kenya, and is a region that has an abundance of wildlife. So they are sharing this landscape with elephants and giraffe and zebra and impala and gazelles, and dozens and dozens of mammal species and hundreds of more species on top of that. And this is a region, as I believe I've talked about in class, where people go on safari in this region as well because of the wildlife viewing opportunities. So here's another, just to give you an idea of the landscape. In that picture you see the Ewaso and Yarrow River, which is the one and only freshwater source in this region for both animals and people. It is possible to dig a well. It's really expensive, upwards of $30,000 because of just sort of the harshness of this environment, the remoteness of it, how deep you have to go for that to dig that well. And this soil and this terrain is just hard. It is hard clay and rock. So digging a well just requires a lot of engineering kind of prowess and time, and therefore money. But the individual in this picture is what we call a Moran, which roughly translated would be a warrior. That are men, ages give or take 14 to 15 up until their late 20s. And they spend a lot of time in this landscape, away from their settlements, away from their homes, tending to livestock. So they are nomadic or semi-nomadic, and kind of moving around this landscape with their livestock, which is predominantly cows and goats, but there are as well sheep, donkeys, and camels that are sometimes part of their herds as well. But goats and cows are the dominant livestock that are being raised. So they're roaming around the same landscape as all of that wildlife, including the lions. A typical settlement in this landscape looks like this from above. It's very basic. They're huts. I have a picture here to give you an idea of what those huts look like. So it's called a boma. Typical boma is a collection of huts, a collection of structures that then would have a protective fence around it. I use the word fence loosely because it's typically just like large tree branches, usually acacia trees, because they have thorns, that they then build around their boma to provide some protection from predators coming in, and not so much predators coming in to cause human harm, but to come in after their livestock, if those livestock are brought in at night, as they often are. So if you can see where my arrow is, these areas within this boma are where the livestock would be brought in at night and protected. But again, remember that these guys, Moran, are often spending the night out in the landscape with their livestock as well. They're not coming back into the boma every night necessarily. So just kind of another picture to give you an idea of sort of what this looks like. The typical manada, which is the house that you see there, and then again, it's a collection of these houses that create that boma, or that cluster of houses. Part of what Ewaso lions does, or part of the threats, I should say, to humans from lions is not so much on them personally. There's very few instances of lions attacking humans. It's more typically that they attack and kill their livestock. So in this picture, which is taken from Ewaso's website, this is the Ewaso lion staff, along with the Kenya Wildlife Service, responding to a lion attack on a donkey. So as you can imagine, when you're in this landscape, and there's an abundance of wildlife in that landscape, including those predators, as well as these settlements, there's a lot of opportunities for conflict. And then you have environmental factors that exacerbate that. So when you have drought, or a less predictable climate than what they used to have, drought increases stress for everybody. It increases stress for the humans, who need to sort out where's their fresh water coming from. And you have wildlife that are feeling that stress as well. And that's going to create pinch points where they're crossing paths more frequently. In addition, with these Moran, historically, it was expected that Moran, as part of their transition to becoming a man, needed to kill a lion, or needed to kill a predator, which was most often a lion. So they would, in that multi-year process of moving from becoming a boy to becoming a man, they were expected to kill a predator. Now, in general, there's reverence for wildlife by the Samburu tribe. So it's not that there's sort of this hatred or animosity, and therefore go kill a lion to prove you're a man. The thought was, that you could sort of afford to lose a lion now and then in the name of becoming a man, and that was sort of a sacrifice that the local culture, the local people were willing to make. But again, it's done out of sort of cultural expression, not out of animosity or hatred for lions. However, as this culture becomes more settled, and as this landscape becomes more divided up, there's been a movement toward more private land tenure, so people owning their lot. That creates less movement opportunities for lions, so people and wildlife have to kind of navigate this increasing mosaic of private property, and that's also going to create more frequency of lions and humans coming into interaction, or their livestock and lions coming into interaction. So just kind of laying that all out to give you the context here. This is Shivani Bala. Shivani started Ewaso Lions, I believe it was in 2009, 2000, right around 2000. God, it might have been before that, maybe 2007, 2008. Shivani is from Kenya, but she's from Nairobi, which is about 200 miles to the south of where we're looking at. But 200 miles may not sound like a huge amount of distance. That is from where she is working, easily a 7 to 8 hour drive, and used to be longer than that before a lot of new paved roads came into play in the last 5 years. So she started Ewaso out of her love for lions. She's got lots of stories growing up as a child in Nairobi of going on safari during the school breaks and school holidays, and just falling in love with wildlife. So she is an outsider to the Samburu culture, but an insider in that she grew up in Kenya and has a better baseline understanding of some of these social and cultural dynamics and tensions that exist than maybe somebody that was outside of Kenya would have coming into to do lion conservation work. So if I want you to just imagine you're standing on this ridge, and again, in that landscape, this rural, remote area, are an abundance of wildlife populations, as well as people living in these remote, basic bomas, and you have a lot of these Moran moving around that landscape with their livestock. So you can kind of start to envision that sometimes these are going to cross paths, and those aren't going to be very positive moments when those paths are being crossed with predators. It's important in this context to understand the role of women. Women in Samburu and in many regions of northern Kenya have historically been marginalized in just extreme ways for hundreds of years. That's slowly shifting. It's a pretty magnificent thing to be able to see that shift going on. So these women have been historically marginalized, meaning they've been treated as property. They were extended no rights at all. It wasn't expected, nor was it encouraged that they would, for example, go to school. Their jobs were to raise kids, get water, get fuel wood, make meals. As the family moved to better rangeland during certain times of the year, to deconstruct those houses, those huts, and load them up on the donkeys, move it all to the next one, reconstruct it, and so on. They're, again, treated as property. Men have historically had multiple wives, because when it's thought of as property, the more property you have, the more wealthy you are considered to be. But women, increasingly in this region of the world, are aware of what their rights are, what their basic human rights are, as well as what opportunities they might have if they can sort of navigate some of this persistent marginalization that has gone on. But they're starting to see that there might be a path for them to not only have rights, basic rights, but they might be able to do things in their lives that were unimaginable by a woman less than a generation ago. So where Ewaso Lions works, women in that region are in that in the middle of that shift of realizing it can be different. It can be different for me than it was for my mother, and wanting to sort of assert herself to chase those opportunities, no matter the barriers that might still be in the way right now. So it's an important part of the social and cultural context there. So as a summary for now, so pastoralism, raising cows and goats, has been the primary livelihood, the primary way of making a living in this region for many, hundreds of years. That's slowly shifting. It's a little bit more diversified, but still the predominant livelihood is raising cows and goats, and that's where people really have their wealth locked up as well. So when you see a herd of goats, that is somebody's savings account, is what that is. It has historically been a nomadic culture, moving within the landscape that's shared with all kinds of wildlife, including the predators. I think now it's probably best to describe it as semi-nomadic. You do have people that are moving to follow where the better pasture and rangelands are, but you also have increasing settlements and people realizing that we want to stay put because there's some economic opportunities that we can have if we stay put that weren't there before. People also want their kids in school more often than they used to. More people, meaning, want their kids in school. So you got to stay put, or somebody's got to stay put for the kids to be able to go to a school. A long tradition of reverence for wildlife. So there's been this coexistence and this respectful coexistence with wildlife for a long time. But again, as that landscape's getting more complicated, as there's more private land ownership, as the climate becomes less predictable, that reverence perhaps is being challenged a little bit. And then I think another piece that's important for you to understand is Kenya got its independence in 1964, and like a lot of parts of sub-Saharan Africa, after independence, sort of followed various ebbs and flows of nonprofits or non-governmental organizations or NGOs coming in to help with very, very mixed results. I mean, in some cases that help was not effective. In some cases that help was destructive. And in some cases it worked. But Ewaso Lions is a nonprofit organization, and working in a region where NGOs have come and gone with mixed results for almost 50 plus years. So I think that's an important part of the context. It's something that I've learned with my nonprofit as well, is realizing that there's a history that predates you, that feeds people's belief systems on what an NGO is, and are they good, are they bad, are they mixed? So there's this history to be aware of, this mixed history of nonprofit organizations working in this region that are typically led by people outside or external to the immediate community. Okay, so what I want you to do next is to spend a little bit of time on Ewaso's website, and then they're written up in various places as well. National Geographic has reported about them a few times. But as you understand the context, if your goal is to protect lions, and they've done a good job at that, if your goal is to protect lions, what do you need to do? I'm going to go back. What from our list here, get to it, computer, what's the most important stuff off this list that do you feel in effectively motivating others, all these people that live in this landscape? How do you positively influence them to protect, to do something, to change something about their behavior to protect lions, right? And if, forgot one of the things I should have mentioned and forgot. So the threats to lions, in addition to this movement towards private property that has made it more difficult for humans, nomadic humans or nomadic Samburu and lions, to move around without running into each other more, in addition to this history of young men having to hunt a lion or hunt a predator to prove their manhood, one of the other threats to lions is when a lion takes down somebody's livestock, right? You've now lost a part of your savings account. The threat to the lion in that case is revenge killing or revenge poisoning. So you lose livestock, or you've lost your 10th livestock, and it's like you just sort of are done with it. You're done sort of coexisting with lions. A common threat or common reaction would be to go find that lion and take care of business, right? And sometimes that is through spears or weapons that you kill that lion. Other times they'll poison an animal that lion will prey on at a later time. So they may kill a goat, or they may kill like an impala and poison it, and then hope that the lion comes and eats it and dies that way. So that's a primary threat to lions in this region as well. Meant to mention that earlier. So go from that leadership list of what you think is the most important, with some explanation, of course, for why. So two other things. You've got two people in the class who are resources for you. Sarah, who did her master's research in this region, not with Ewaso specifically, but in that region, and understands the social and cultural context. And then you have a student in your class as well who grew up in this region, probably about 60 miles to the south of that. So Carly, if you're willing to be a resource for people, make yourself known. Because it's, it might be sort of hard to get your head around just by going from this presentation and websites on trying to understand everything. So, Sarah, hit pause on the video, and then you'll work in groups to do this activity, and then we'll come back and look at what we found. All right. Let's start with a fantastic joke. So a lion walks into a bar, says, "Bartender, I would like a gin and tonic." The bartender sort of like quizzically looks at the lion. He's like, "Well, why the big pause?" And then the lion holds up his paws and says, "'Cause I'm a lion." So that's a good one. You probably can't hear me right now because there's so much laughter. It's probably still going on. I'll go ahead and give it a few minutes for that to die down. So you might need to hit the pause button to let the laughter die down. Yeah, are we good? All right. So let me go through what Ewaso does, what their kind of programming is. And you would have picked up on some of this while you were looking at what the organization does. So they hire these Moran to be a part of a program they call Warrior Watch. And they essentially hire these young men to track lions, to go essentially collect information about where did you see a lion, how many of them were there, what were they doing, taking pictures of them, getting just some real basic observation-based data about lions. And I remember a lot of these young men are already out moving around the landscape, so they can kind of use their eyes and ears to be a resource of data for Ewaso about what's kind of going on with lion behavior out there. What that does is has a couple outcomes. One is it begins to maybe shift some of these warriors towards lion advocates. So Generia, who now he works for Ewaso Lions these days and runs the Warrior Watch program, he was somebody who grew up with kind of this mixed, like, do I love lions, do I hate lions, sort of experience. And as he represents this demographic that when you involve people in the observation of lions, number one, you have those moments when you see an animal in their natural habitat and not in a context of them taking down one of your livestock. It does change your perception on your attitude of this animal. In addition, it becomes a source of income. These guys get paid to do that work. So they're getting a financial incentive to kind of watch out for lions as well. So it has that effect. What that allows the organization to do is when they recognize, like, okay, there was recently a lion that attacked this livestock, and we know that lion has kind of stayed in this area because our Warrior Watch program tells us that. You can communicate with people in that community of, like, hey, there's a lion that's been prowling around this settlement, so be sure you're keeping your livestock protected at night. And there's some different deterrents that you can use to do that. You can hang a flashing light outside of that area where the livestock are kept at night, and that's actually a deterrent for a number of predators. But it gives them data to go and work and talk to communities about, here's what we know about what's going on with lions right now, or we know that this is kind of emerging as a hot spot right now. So use these deterrents, be extra careful, be on guard that this is going on. And then they'll also meet with elders in this region of the world. It is generally an elder-driven kind of governance structure. So as far as who, at the scale of a region or a scale of a community, where are decisions coming from on kind of how is this community going to progress, that's typically within a group of historically older men. Some areas have now invited women to be a part of these elder decision-making groups. But it also will reach out to elders and say, let me tell you about what's going on in this region, because these elders become great sources of information for everybody in their community through kind of a traditional word-of-mouth type of network. So they've got Warrior Watch. They work with the elders, meet with the elders. In addition, they have some programming for women. They have a literacy program for women where they can come and learn to read and write. I forget the frequency of that, if it's like roughly once a week or something along those lines. These women, as you can see in the picture, also make some pretty elaborate beadwork, and they sell that beadwork, or they find places for that beadwork to be sold so that it supports some income generation for those women. It's a similar function as to what my nonprofit has as well. So they are investing in the literacy of women, and then also investing in some modest income generation for those women as well. And that may not have be directly addressing a threat to lions, but we'll see why that's important here. And I know that Shivani has sort of lamented at times about how sometimes her organization gets criticized. Like, are you a conservation organization or are you a community development organization? And these shouldn't be things that we think of as mutually exclusive, and we'll look at why that's important in a second. And then they also do their Lions Kids Camp. They once a year have a couple dozen kids from the nearby communities who are selected by their teachers based on some sort of performance achievement to come and participate in a week-long camp at their headquarters area to learn about lions, go, look at what a warrior does on the Warrior Watch, go on a safari game drive and look at wildlife more generally. And kind of like, in many respects, it resembles what we might do in an environmental education camp in the U.S., but it's focused squarely on lions, and it is focused on lions because these kids are coming from a community where they have this kind of persistent human-lion conflict. In addition, Ewaso Lions has started on sponsoring kids for high school. My nonprofit's actually working with them on that, since that's sponsoring kids for school and some out-of-school programming is very central and core to the work that Samburu Youth Education Fund does, and Ewaso is getting into that business, but we're partnering up on that to take advantage of some efficiencies. So when we did interviews, which was by a couple of graduate students, with people internal to and external to the organization. So internal meaning paid staff. You've got Shivani, and she's got a number of people that work there at the organization. Probably about, if you include the warriors who, which of course will include the warriors, it's probably about 25 to 30 staff that work for Ewaso. At the actual Ewaso camp, their headquarters, there's about 10 or a dozen or so employees that are based and work there, while the warriors that are doing the monitoring are out in the landscape. In addition, you've got board members that are part of Ewaso Lions, so they were interviewees as well. And then you've got these representatives that are stakeholders to how lions are dealt with in this community, right? You've got women, you've got elders, you've got the warriors, so communicating with them. So this is a non-quantitative bar chart, if such a thing exists. Well, it does exist because it's before you, but I just wanted to visually depict that what was most important as far as what Ewaso Lions is doing to be successful in the conservation of lions. Trust was the runaway winner. After trust was the importance of an individual champion, which was Shivani and Gennaria. In this case, Gennaria was, I mentioned earlier, he is the number 2 person at Ewaso Lions. And then stakeholder engagement as being sort of the third most important type of behavior. So when we look at those more specifically within each of those domains, remember there's a subset of behaviors that comprise that domain. So when we prioritize those by what were the behaviors that Ewaso was doing within the trust, I mean, trust was so important that practically all the behaviors were important there, that they're super familiar with the local context. Shivani talks about how when she started the organization, she spent very little time actually conserving lions those first few years, and just spent time being there, becoming known to the community, earning their trust. Things like investing in women's literacy might not have a direct impact on protecting lions, but they have a very direct impact on building trust when they realize she wants something good for us. Okay, and so when it does come time to talk about things that are needed to protect lions, they're a much more willing listener because of this years of investment that they've had in working with the women to improve and better their lives socially and economically. So familiarity with local context, building relationships, and then that exchange of knowledge was also one that emerged. The individual champion, there's been a lot of adversity over the last 10 years since Ewaso's been around. There's been a couple very, very severe droughts. There is tribal conflict that emerges and kind of pops up every year, multiple times even. So as that sort of adversity comes up, being able to persist through that and not sort of like just give up or sort of let it affect your commitment to protecting lions. And that's connected obviously to unwavering passion. If you've got that, then you're going to persist through that adversity. And then inspiring others, primarily within her staff. Within the next two, there were kind of two behaviors, one behavior from each domain that really emerged out of the larger set of behaviors from each of those domains. In stakeholder engagement, it's about managing conflict, right? And that's, we're talking about predator livestock conflict. So super important because it's such a major threat to lion populations. And then with that internal excellence, the one that emerged within those behaviors is that ability to adapt to change quickly. You've got your plan for the week, and then you find out that a lion has has taken down a goat in a community that's 30 kilometers away. You have to stop what you're doing and respond because that lion is now vulnerable to a revenge killing. And then you have these large-scale events like droughts that are happening that's sort of like, okay, we need to reprioritize what our activities should be given this drought. So that ability to adapt to change quickly was particularly important in the case of Ewaso. So 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 8 behaviors out of that larger set of 15 to 16 behaviors that really emerged as the most important in this particular case. Vision wasn't a behavior or domain, and then the associated behaviors. It just wasn't something that came up really in enough of those interviews, and really any at all, to kind of make the cut. So we have this kind of what we say conservation leadership means, this framework we're working with, right? It's these 5 domains and their associated behaviors, but what we're looking at is in a given case, what's the subset that is most important in this case? And what you see on the slide in front of you is what we believe to be true in the case of Ewaso. So see how that measures up to what you thought, your group thought was going to make the cut. The goal here wasn't so much for you to know like what's important in protecting lions, because there's only a very small number of places in the world where you would go to get a job to do that. But by doing the activity, you got familiar with those domains and you became familiar with those behaviors. So that was the goal here, was to use this case for you to kind of dig into and look at what those behaviors are. So, all right, that's all I got for this round. Have a fantastic rest of class and an excellent end to your week.